And we have Naomi and her co-editor and good friend Marion Winik here today because we are celebrating the publication of this brand new book. Its title is I Know About 1,000 Things, The Writings of Anne Alejandro of Uvalde, Texas. And this is a book that you'll hear a lot more about in a few minutes. I just want to say that a book like this really just has a glow about it. There's this beautiful cover photograph from Michael Nye, who's Naomi's husband, and a great picture section inside that includes photos of Anne Alejandro and also some of the paintings that Marion did. A beautiful forward by Naomi and afterward by Marion Winik. And what they did is this beautiful piece of literary citizenship where they took the collected writings of their friend Anne Alejandro and turned them into this exquisite volume. It really is gorgeous. We're so proud. This is in the Wittliff Collections book series. We're selling the books over here in our gift shop. Just look for the little horsey in the window and go right through there. You'll find the books. And then we're doing a book signing after the program in the gift shop too. So keep that in mind. And to guide the conversation today, we have Cathlin Noonan, a graduate student in creative writing here at Texas State. So in just a moment, Cathlin will introduce Naomi and Marion and take it away. But before we do that, we do have a very special part of the program today that I want to introduce. And we learned that a beloved and cherished member of our advisory council, Ellen Wagnon, actually knew Anne Alejandro. Ellen is related to Anne by marriage, had a neighboring ranch outside of Uvalde, and they were very close. And when I heard Ellen was coming today, I asked her, can you just maybe say a few words about the Anne that you knew as part of the program? And she didn't respond for several days. And finally, I reached back out and said, not everybody's made for public speaking, but it'll be okay. And she said, no, it's not that. I'm just looking to see if there's somebody more qualified than myself to make these remarks. And I was like, no, we want you. And so with that, we are having Ellen Wagnon come up and tell us a little bit about Anne. Well, Ellen.
Well, thank you, Steve. That was very nice. So one of the great joys in my life is being a member of the Wittliff Advisory Council. And it makes me very, very proud all the time, especially though when I'm in this space and at one of our events celebrating so much of the great art and writing and that's going on in Texas. So it's my pleasure really to be here. There are probably a lot of people here who knew Anne longer and probably better than I did. I got very lucky to meet Anne and be brought into a very close bond with her because that bond already existed between her and my husband, Robert, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and his cohort, some of whom are, and you know who you are, who were lucky enough to have Anne as their teacher at Uvalde High School. She was not that much older than they were, and so there was a great friendship between her and her students. And she loved being a teacher, as it is so well documented in the book. But the Anne I knew, because I did get to be very close to her very quickly, in my mind, Anne, well, I'm going to start first with the fact that you have Uvalde, Texas, on the cover, in the title of this book, did not escape me. Because Uvalde is a very unique little town. And it is, whether or not you know this, one of the great crossroads of the world. And anywhere we go, we find people from Uvalde or who know someone from Uvalde or will tell a story about someone in Uvalde that they have heard. in Chicago, in Estes Park, Colorado, in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, you name it, you will find Uvaldians everywhere. And my boys, we have 3 boys, are constantly amazed by that fact. For most of the time that we proudly represented Uvalde, nobody really knew about the little town of Uvalde. And unfortunately, now everyone knows about the town of Uvalde. And the tragedy that happened, I think, is, it probably would have broken Anne Alejandro's heart. So maybe it's best that she didn't experience that. No one had a bigger heart than Anne Alejandro, and I believe that Anne was the quintessential Texas woman. Tough as a boot on the outside, and tender-hearted and caring on the inside. And so I'm going to jump around a little bit because I really wasn't quite sure how to approach this. I want to start with a quote from the book because it really encapsulates my relationship with Anne. I believe it's a damn long way in every possible way from Batesville, Texas, in the 4th poorest country in the USA, to Houston. But she and I bridged that distance and erased it. Some people have easier lives than others, and Anne did not have an easy life. But she didn't let that stop her. And in fact, I think it galvanized her and focused her on the things that she knew were important to her. She was fiercely passionate in everything. Her love for her husband, Joe, her adoration of her boys, Dylan and Luke, their wives, Jennifer and Neva, and her grandchildren. Texas rivers. My goodness, did anyone love Texas rivers more than Anne Alejandro? If you haven't been told of or read a transcript of her testimony on the sanctity of river access that was to a committee of the River Authority, I believe, you should seek it out, but I can't repeat it here. Amazingly creative. And the one thing that she would say about herself that you referenced, but she really did talk about it, not only in herself but in others, was her magic. And she did have a special magic, a special way of affecting people and reaching them, and of seeing magic in others, whether or not they saw it in themselves or whether or not anyone else saw it. Her magical self was very real, and it made her very special. And she was so funny. My goodness. I know it comes across in the book, but to think of all of the times we sat around our fire pit and she would just tell stories, and we would just laugh and laugh until we cried. So our ranches abut each other with the Leona River running between, and their ranch house, which, as it is referred to in the book, which is not there any longer because it burned down, but is high up on the hill. And in the wintertime, we could see the house and its lights when there were no leaves on the trees, and she could see our lights, not so much in the summer. But she wanted us to have a way to communicate when we were there, let each other know, so she wanted us to get flagpoles put in And when I got there, I was supposed to run a flag up the flagpole, and she was supposed to do the same so we could let each other know we were in residence, sort of like the Queen. And I said, well, Ann, what's our flag going to be? And she said, how about a witch on a broom? And I said, okay, why not? One time, she showed up completely unannounced. We had a gaggle of kids there with baby goats in her truck. Not in the bed of the truck, in her truck, because she wanted the kids to be able to bottle feed them. And she had brought the bottles with the food. And then, as quick as she came with them, she loaded them back up and she left. I loved the references to Christmas. She loved Christmas, and every single Christmas, without fail, we got baked goods brought to us from Ann. Again, she would show up, didn't know when it was going to be, and it was cookies, cakes, pies, whatever, homemade by her for us, and always accompanied by an amaryllis that had been planted and sprouted and timed so that it would bloom in the dreariness of January. She didn't care about any more flowers to be around for Christmas. She wanted that to happen for the people she gave them to when there weren't other flowers around. It was really special. And I couldn't believe it in the book when you talked about the pie plate that she had gotten, that she had bought off of eBay. I said, I have that pie plate. I know I have that pie plate. And I went looking because she had brought a pie in an obviously vintage pie plate. Mine actually is different, so it wasn't the only one. It wasn't the one from the book. Mine has cherries on it and a matching server. But one of my treasures now. Her love of Christmas, one year she brought us, it was when she was in her weaving phase, which I didn't even know she was in a weaving phase. And we have a 12 Days of Christmas themed rug that she made that is such an incredible work of art. And we put it on the floor of our boys' toy closet. It fit exactly so that they could play in this little closet that we had and, put all their toys out on it. And again, I can't believe how lucky I am. When Luke and Neva got married, they asked, I'm sure at Ann's insistence, for our boys to be in their wedding. And she handmade little red satin vests and bow ties because she knew we wouldn't be able to find them to fit them. I still have those as well. I did know, but we both loved Secretariat and were obsessed with Secretariat and the British royal family. We could spend a long time, long time talking about that. So I loved Anne. She was bigger than life. Anyone who knew her loved her. We miss her. We miss her terribly. But I feel very lucky that I was able to have her in my life. And I feel even luckier to have your lovely book so I can open it to any page and feel her. So thank you both very much for such a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm
I'm going to introduce Naomi and Marion really quickly so that they can share some of Anne's words with us first. And I'm going to do a very formal introductions, even though it's probably, we want to focus on Anne. But Marion Winik is the author of 9 books, including The Big Book of the Dead from Counterpoint Press, The First Comes Love from Pantheon. Her essays have been published in the New York Times Magazine, The Sun, and elsewhere. Her column at BaltimoreFishbowl.com has been running since 2011. Marion is a professor at the University of Baltimore. She reviews books for the Washington Post, Oprah Daily, and People, among others, and hosts the NPR podcast, The Weekly Reader. She was also a commentator on All Things Considered for 15 years. Marion is the recipient of the 2023 National Book Critics Circle Service Award. And she also lived here in Texas for over 20 years. Yeah. And we also, as we heard already, Naomi was just a winner. I won't repeat big news, but she has been honored with a lot of Lifetime Achievement Awards. Naomi has written or edited more than 30 books, including more recently Grace Notes, Poems About Family from HarperCollins, Cast Away, Poems for Our Time, Green Willow Books, and The Tiny Journalist from BOA Editions. She is also the author of several books of poetry and fiction for children, including Habibi from Simon Press, for which she received the Jane Addams Children's Book Award in 1998. Naomi has served as Young People's Poet Laureate of the United States and People Editor for the New York Times Magazine and the Texas Observer. She has worked as a visiting writer all her life, currently here at Texas State University, which we are very, very lucky for. She received Lifetime Achievement Awards for the Texas Institute of Letters, the National Book Critics Circle, and the Arab American National Museum, and she lives in San Antonio. Thank you.
I'm going to explain how this book thing started, and then we're going to read a little bit from some sections of the book.
Could I just say one thing first?
Sure.
Ellen, we wish you could go on our little Texas book tour with us for the next 6 days and be everywhere with us, because it means so much to have somebody who sat around a campfire with her. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your beautiful remembrances. And Cathlin Noonan is getting ready to graduate from the MFA program here at Texas State and is one of the best poets I have read in all my life. So keep your eyes out for Cathlin's work. Thank you.
Okay, so my friendship with Naomi goes back to 1980 when we met at a writers' conference at UT in Austin. And over these years, we've gone down many roads together, but one of the roads was Naomi's correspondence with Anne Alejandro. In the 1990s, Naomi started forwarding to me these letters she was receiving from Anne, so I could see just how wonderful she was. Forthright, down to earth, funny, heartbreaking, and also very prolific. The letters were long, and there were a lot of them, and they were full of amazing stuff. Since she was 29 years old, Anne dealt with serious chronic illness, and that's what kept her from pursuing a traditional writing career. So sometime along the way of this correspondence, Naomi and I suggested to her that we could help her get a book published. And Anne liked the idea, but she was pretty self-aware and thought that she was so bossy and so picky that we might have a hard time with this project, and she actually suggested to us that we wait until after she was dead. So we did. Anne died in 2019 at the age of 64, and this book, I Know About 1,000 Things, is the result of our promise to her. We went through literally thousands of pages, and we found all the best sentences and paragraphs and wisecracks, and we arranged them into theme sections like land, loss, snakes, motherhood, sports. Naomi wrote an opening essay, I wrote an afterword, and we were able to add a really cool photo section with her family snapshots. I feel with this book like Anne sort of stands for all the talented writers in all time who for some reason do such great work but live and die without getting any recognition. And by lifting her up like this, I feel like somehow we're acknowledging them all. So and turn it over to Naomi to read from the introduction.
Anne did publish a chapbook of poems called Beauty Parlor Poems that won a contest in North Carolina many, many years ago. And unfortunately, they misspelled her name on the cover. And that was pretty much the biggest thing she published. She did publish some essays and poems here and there. But she did have a dream of sharing her voice. This was always something in her thoughts. So this is how my introduction begins. My sister married your boyfriend, she announced loudly after raising her hand in the classroom full of teachers. The first words she ever said to me. Everyone gasped and turned to look at her. A spunky blonde with pigtails, wearing a checkered red and white pinafore-style dress and a devilish grin. I had given my Saturday afternoon in-service educational pep talk about encouraging poetry writing with kids and teenagers and asked if there were any questions. This was what I got. What? She sat there grinning, enjoying the spotlight, and shrugged. It hit me who she must be. In front of everyone, I said I was happy about this union. It was true. Her sister, the boyfriend, and I had all been friends during college. She kept grinning. I said, "You see me later, ha." But I felt a little shaken. Anne would always be an attention getter, one for a flourish. In that moment, I could never have known that she would write me thousands of pages for decades, and I would become one of her biggest fans. So it goes on and talks about her childhood. I'm just going to read two little sections here from the next little part. The Uvalde that Anne knew had majestic shade trees, a historic opera house founded 1896, a country club, wide streets, numerous Tex-Mex cafes and stores, and an 18-hole public golf course along the Leona River. The beautiful public El Progreso Memorial Library was set in a prominent green space in the heart of town. The population was predominantly Mexican-American, as with most smaller towns and cities in South Texas. But Anne's family was white. Her ancestors came to far-flung rural Texas from England and Ireland before the Civil War. I go on talking about her schooling, and she had her sister Liza. They were enraptured as children by their baby dolls in wooden cradles. They took good care of them, bathed and dressed them, and were horrified by girls who did not attend to their own dolls with similar care. At age 6 or 7, Anne submitted some of her writing to a children's magazine, along with a contributor's note about riding in the back of the truck. Anne was always writing. She wanted to express herself and be recognized, says Liza, who now remembers Anne as a magical thinker. She had an imaginary friend named Susie who lived in her big toe. Her imagination was huge. Anne was always original, and Liza was always interested in her thoughts. When Anne was 18, she married Joe Alejandro of Uvalde, who was 19. They had met a year earlier in high school. At that time, an Anglo girl marrying a Mexican-American boy raised eyebrows in small-town Texas. As Joe puts it now, we had a hidden courtship at first. Their mixed-race romance was more shocking to the community than the fact that they were so young. But their parents accepted it, and they didn't care what people thought. Goes on talking more about her parents, her own ranch where they lived, her chronic illness, and so forth. We were going to put as a subtitle in this book, we were going to call it Anne Alejandro, the best Texas writer almost no one has heard of. But after the tragedy there, we all did think it was important to put Uvalde on the cover of the book. So they say that now on the flyleaf. So Marion and I are just going to read some little sections from one of the sections of the book called Advice.
It's one of the first. And so you have to imagine that these paragraphs and sentences that we're reading are taken from 15-page letters that are single-spaced. And Naomi was an incredible, it was great at going through these letters, and she'd say, oh, these 2 pages are great. And I'd look at it and I'd say, well, I think it's really this 2 paragraphs that are great. And we went back and forth this way. And then we made up the categories. And once we had the categories, it started to become more clear how it was all going to work. But I think even though it's all very disjointed and pulled out of letters that are written over a 30-year period, it does tell a story when you go through it and you get to know the characters, her brother Lee, her husband Joe, it's her family. But anyway, this advice section is one of the first. And we're just going to...
We're jumping into the middle
Jumping into the middle. And this is, I think, very appropriate because Ellen talked about her teaching. If you love teaching, there is just nothing better to do with your life because it keeps you so dynamic and grateful to be surrounded by so many cute and heroic people. I just love seeing my students everywhere and how their faces light up all over town.
You know, I have always thought, first make peace. Don't set any preconditions for it. Just say, here comes the train of peace. Deal with it. Here are the borders, here are the schools, here are the voting booths. Here is the place where each of you is equal. Here are the peacekeepers. Here is Amnesty International. Here is the Red Cross, the Red Crescent. Here are the hospitals and libraries and parks and gardens. Take this. Make peace of it. Make peace in spite of those whose lives are bound up in hatred or conquest or racism. This is no metaphor.
The thing I have learned from fish and love and marriage and children and horses and mules and St. Anthony is that you never find what you are looking for. You do not find the right fish, the piece of jewelry or wallet lost, the right horse, the right job, the right car, or cut of meat at H-E-B. You do not find what it was that God meant 3 years ago, the perfect place at the river, the color to paint your house, and you cannot even conceive a child till you have ceased struggling. The right things and people always find you when you were not looking at all.
Fear is valid and tangible and real. There is some fear you can just avoid, like the roller coasters I used to love. Other fears you have to press on, like poetry readings and being on TV and working with the horses, because to avoid them would really diminish your life.
I was active in the brand new community theater for about 5 years. It terrified me. I loved rehearsal, but I hated performance, though I loved the happiness when it was over. There was only one play which was totally fun for me. I played Stanley, Charlene, and Jody in the first ever Greater Tuna played by anyone but the authors. They let us do it because Uvalde was such an outpost, they thought that no one would ever find out about it. Instead, we got huge crowds from all over the state and were held over.
Good manners are the last word and eventually see you through everything because they give nobody any ammunition against you. Good manners are the learned extension of something higher and truer, even if it is not our wish to show good manners, especially to those who have not shown them to us. It is, for the time being, the closest step we can take to loving our neighbors with full compassion. And it is equally hard for me, especially hard for me, because when you hurt one of my own, I am a mother grizzly bear.
Good manners are the beginning of forgiveness, especially of the unforgivable. If we cannot say to ourselves and mean it, I forgive them, then the way to open our hearts is to say, I am willing to try to forgive them. In this way, you can begin some kind of seed of love for people you do not love at all. I don't believe in being fake, but I believe manners can get us through 1,000 otherwise hateful moments. For example, acts of racism against my husband or my children.
I especially hate bad manners in public discourse and politics. And it bothers me a great deal that the disagreeers are immediately labeled haters. Moments of love are what carry the human race forward and give us hope and atone for evil by defying the great darkness. At the beginnings of each section, Marion and I wrote little intros. So that kind of like gives a few more tidbits about her life or puts things in some kind of context.
Yeah, like in the next section is called Writing and Mail. And the first thing in it is something that she wrote to us when we were talking about doing this book during her life. I think the title of my book should be 600 Ways to Eat Dirt. But you know way more about things like this than I do, and I will be helpful and amenable to whatever you want me to think about. So honestly, we talked before this event saying we could open this book to any page and start doing this and go on, and it would be so much fun. But we're going to let you discover some of it on your own.
And we hope you will.
And I'm just going to read a little bit from the afterword, and then Naomi's going to read a final. Anne has the last word.
Yeah, I'll read that.
So
but I just want to say, if Anne could see you today, just sitting here in this beautiful space, and with Steve Davis, who was our best encourager from the very beginning. Steve really liked Anne's voice and urged us forward, and that meant so much to us because we really needed somebody besides ourselves, after all this reading and filtering through thousands of pages, to say, yeah, I think this could be a book. We'll always appreciate that deeply, Steve. But I feel like if Anne could see you here today, sitting here, she would be so proud and happy and just want to give every one of you a pie.
When Naomi and I started going through Anne's writing in 2018, and a few years later, as I drafted the first version of our book proposal, I had a certain way I would explain the project to people. I would describe the decades of correspondence, the mountains of letters and emails and Facebook posts. I would say that I thought of Anne as an outsider writer, sort of like the outsider artists in Baltimore's American Visionary Art Museum. I would explain that though she rarely worked on official manuscripts or sought publication, she loved the idea of us doing the work for her. The book became a treasured idea that came up frequently in our correspondence. But then there was this little dust-up about Naomi's idea for the cover art that led her to suggest that we publish posthumously. I always concluded my little spiel with the fact that she was a profoundly Texas-y writer from a little place in South Texas you never heard of. That last bit changed on Tuesday, May 24th, 2022, when Uvalde became a place everyone has heard of, the same way they've heard of Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and Aurora. As the news came in, even before we knew that Anne's 10-year-old great-niece, Layla Salazar, was among the lost, it crossed both our minds that it was a blessing Anne didn't live to see this. How could she have borne it? On the other hand, she would have had so much to say about it. Interestingly, as we continued sifting through the material in the months after the shooting, it seemed she had already said some of those things. Her writing about grief and loss, about civility as a response to discord, her struggle with faith in the face of terrible pain, all seemed to have a new resonance. At the same time, it was as if the true original nature of Uvalde, the little place in South Texas hardly anybody ever heard of, with its feral pigs and green jays and mules and families celebrating Christmas, was actually preserved in amber by Anne's writings about it. We'd always planned for me to come down so we could visit Uvalde together and meet with Anne's husband, Joe. I wanted to see the places that were important to her, particularly the ranch that was the center of her life since childhood. I had a plane ticket to fly down in the summer of 2022. And then the tragedy occurred in May. We wondered if we should still go, but the answer was yes, of course. It was more important than ever, really. And luckily, we arrived in Uvalde after the hordes of media and other doom-related visitors had departed. The town had returned to what I imagined was its normal level of traffic and commotion, mostly wind and birdsong. Yet the sorrow was everywhere you looked, from the Welcome to Uvalde sign on the edge of town, to the grounds of the elementary school, to the town square, all marked with crosses, heaped with stuffed animals and withered bouquets, posted with scrawled notes and printed signs of support from police and fire departments and school districts all over Texas and beyond. Downtown, there were stencils of angels in the shop windows alongside the brand new Children's Bereavement Center. The old-fashioned ice cream parlor and gaily colored candy store whispered the names of their missing patrons. Even the sign for a flooring distributor called Fresh Start Decoration seemed aware of the discouraging odds against fresh starts. Around many corners of downtown, in hidden alleys overlooking empty lots, muralists from all over the state were painting the beautiful shining faces of the 21 victims. Near our Airbnb, a sparkling whitewashed refuge in the oldest building in town, an artist on a scaffold and her assistant worked through the night. Locals were surprised and then pleased that we had actually shown up to talk about something else. And I go on from there to explain our trip to the ranch and our meeting with Anne's family and actually our discussion of the tragedy with her son. And at the end, they sent me up to the top of the hill where that house was burned down that Ellen told you about to watch the sunset. And we concluded the book with Anne's comments on the sunset.
So this is Anne. Every sunset, every flower or field of flowers, every cactus, every river and drought, with 117 degrees going on for days straight. It will be part of me. All the names of all the plants and trees and grasses I will know like my own. On summer evening breezes, I will smell the Gulf, surf 200 miles away. Someday, I will be almost whole. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marion. So,
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to start with some questions. I'm actually going to start with a quick quote as well from a section that you didn't read from and ask a little bit about how receiving so many thousands of pages of writing was as the receiver. But first, I think that Anne has advice that I saw come up over and over in her excerpts. And this is a bit of that advice for all of us. In March, the bluebonnets will be glorious, so you must come, but in snake boots, because they emerge furious and snapping in teeming hordes from dens on exactly March 6th. We can roast marshmallows and listen to the multitudinous bands of coyotes, and we will have no armor. We will await the purpose of the day, and though we nearly miss it, the purpose of all days is watch, listen, learn. And I noticed Anne listens a lot and smells a lot and learns a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that and your relationship with her?
well, I always felt receiving first letters in the mailbox from Anne and then later emails from Anne, that every letter was always a call to attention. I mean, you knew not to try to read her letter while you were unpacking the groceries. You knew to wait till bedtime or when you had, a little spaciousness, because it would necessitate your whole heart, your whole spirit. And I always felt moved by her letters and occasionally challenged, like, how can anyone write this much? Not to mention this well, but there was a sense of wanting to come to her letters with the sort of time she obviously put into them. And as writers who were publishing our work a lot, we both encouraged her so much, like, you could send your work here, you could send your work, you could do this, you could do that. But after a certain time, I think we sort of stopped doing that because we could see that somehow that other step was beyond her.
And Naomi had one time created, from lines of Anne's letters, she created a poem that she put in an anthology of Texas poetry. And so Anne had seen this happen, where another editor had gone through the giant letters and pulled out the nuggets and made it into something, pretty different than the original by that way. And I think Anne, that was one of the most thrilling things for her, was to that poem and being in that book. So in that way, we had kind of like her blessing,
Yeah.
do this. But it's a huge project, and everyone in the room that's a writer knows what editing and streamlining and revision can mean, and about killing your darlings. Like for Anne would have been killing battalions of darlings, and it was sometimes easier for us to kill them for her, I think.
She was thrilled that reviewers all picked out her piece as their favorite piece in the book. And then she would write to me and say, well, that's good. They really liked my piece. And as the days went on, I completely forgot that, that I had filtered through many, many pages to create this piece, but it was totally her piece.
And it's the first thing.
It's her piece.
It's the first thing in the book. In the
we
advice
put it in
section.
the book.
Yeah, it's in here.
Well, I think it's one of the gifts of reading this book is that the writing was personal to you, and then we get the gift of the letter writing as well. So I know it sounds like it was an immense job to go through so much writing, but what such lovely writing she has as well.
But she also had that gift of, she would write you something very intimate, but you felt like everybody in Texas should read this because they would all appreciate what she's saying.
That's how this whole thing started, and with her thinking that I should read all this. I never met Anne Alejandro, not once.
That's the craziest truth about our book, is she never met her
in person. I mean,
I met her a lot.
I became part of this correspondence group, and I'm less patient than Naomi. You may have already guessed this, but I'd be like, "What is this? 20-page letter in 10-point type?" But the wall of text. I wanted the book to have the inside covers to be like reproductions of the 10-point type pages, but it really. To me, it was really like stumbling on, gems when you would find these things. And they're not all one sentence, as you'll see when you read the book. There's, longer anecdotes and storytelling. And we also have a few things in here that she wrote intentionally as short stories and poems. There's a few of those, too. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Anne? You mentioned in the illness section that pain was her muse, and maybe there was no one who wrote as much about it as her. But she uses a lot of humor, and she connects probably why you wanted all of Texas to read her writing. But can you talk a little bit about what you might have learned from her in that?
Well, I think she really kind of followed that counsel of the great Texas writer William Goyen, who used to say, I always start with trouble, because trouble gives you some kind of friction and makes your writing interesting. And Anne would often begin out of a place of intense pain that she was experiencing, but she would move to other topics. That would be sort of the triggering subject, but then she would go elsewhere with it. And I think that writing was a way, something that helped her survive, to suffer such intense pain for half your life and never be able to get to the bottom of it. And that was all, there was mystery involved in it. Like, okay, fibromyalgia, but other stuff too, but what? And it could never be pinpointed. And, trying all these different cures and seeing all these different doctors, there was a lot of frustration. And also being a person of enormous faith. Anne was a very devout Catholic. And there was a lot of frustration, like, okay, God, so what prayer am I not saying?
That made her writing about faith really more interesting to someone who generally wouldn't be thinking I would be interested in reading about someone's Catholic faith. But because she so directly would confront, her anger and disillusionment with God in this really very Anne way, it made really engaging and important, I think, the chapters on faith in the book.
Agreed, yeah. And also you could feel her coming to some kind of terms through the writing, which all of us here who write know that we try to figure things out through our writing. We don't go there with the summary of what, everything that is clear to us. We go there with a compelling mystery or disturbance or desire to understand something better. And so you could almost feel Anne doing that as she wrote, like things falling into a different perspective for her. Her writing had a very powerful sense of activity about it. You know, even though toward the end of the book or someplace in the book she talks about being confined to a chair a lot for the last years of her life, still she always seemed 10 times more active than most people because of everything she was thinking about and everything within her reach that she cared about.
It's interesting because, like, as I'm saying, faith was like sort of a battleground for her where she was, you know, trying to understand and trying to, but where she found solace was in nature. And her writing about the land and animals, it's the best. You could see, this is where she is like escaping the prison of her body, you know, and the weakness of her 80-pound frame, and you know, and all these things that she did confront at length in the writings. But when she starts writing about nature, it's that all that disappears, and you know, she really takes you into her connection to the natural world is so powerful, and it's something that makes her nature writing very extraordinary.
And I think it also reminds us how much we have in Texas. You know, the birds, the butterflies,
The
rivers, the snakes, the mules, the goats, the horses. Yeah. I mean, really, I found myself really just wanting to be with animals more when I would read one of Anne's letters.
Yeah, and she really captures Texas. And I know it's very important that Uvalde is in the title of the book, and you mentioned it being like Amber, her writing. Can you talk about what writing does to a place that's kind of indelibly marked by violence and tragedy? Because I do think it's something we all face every day, and it is beautiful testimony to the place of Uvalde, this book.
I mean, I don't know if we'll really know that until, you know, her book, we're going to introduce her book in Uvalde tomorrow. Is it tomorrow?
No, Saturday.
Saturday. So, I mean, her book, this is just sort of happening now, you know, and I think it's really cool because the library is having us there to introduce the book. The same day they're having a big event for survivor families related to people, so they'll also be coming there, and there's a toy giveaway, and I feel like somehow, just even by that, these things are connected, you know, and this Anne's book is a reminder of what the place is, you know, besides this terrible thing that happened. And I think people from Uvalde are going to be so happy to have it described in this way.
And that sense of we know one another, these are our places, we're connected, what do I have that you might like, what can I give you? I do feel that when people write, I mean, I've seen this with the poets of Gaza over the past year, that their work is taking on a different, you know, kind of voice, a larger voice for people, because they want to think about, wait a minute, these are not numbers, these are human beings living there. And I hope that people in Uvalde feel that Anne, you know, stands tall as, you know, an eloquent person narrating this place.
But she wasn't always all a booster either. I mean, she calls it mean little white town, and you know, I think there's parts of her comment on Uvalde that they're going to resonate with people too, but not because they're so, you know, beautiful and loving. I mean, she
was very protective of her husband and her children.
Yeah.
And she did not want anyone to insult their race ever. And but she was outspoken about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she was
feisty.
Outspoken and
fearless.
Honest. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned her voice was she was unapologetic about who she was.
Yeah,
and it's like there's a line in there. Today I went to Austin. I didn't hate it as much as usual.
Well, she was really anxious around traffic. Yeah.
What did you think when you got her first letter that was a wall of text and 10 pages?
I thought, wow. I said, she's more interesting than the boyfriend. No. Yeah, I felt lucky. I felt lucky to suddenly she would want to write to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like such a gift to get letters. I know I read the book and I thought every single one of these could be an epigraph to a letter to someone personal.
Oh, thanks.
We hope
such
that
a
this book
beautiful
will
book.
inspire more letter writing. And even if, emails are letters too. So any format, but just I think the idea of addressing your writings to a person or persons
Yeah.
puts it in a context that's different than writing something for publication, And so all these were written in epistolary mode with an audience in mind, and I think that helps create a frame of intimacy. And also, sometimes when you're writing just as a writer, you're thinking, no one will ever read this, no one cares, why do I bother? But if you're writing a letter, someone's definitely going to read it.
One person. Yeah.
Or two.
Right. But also, I've always really loved writing that causes you to feel suddenly richer, enriched by what you just read. Like, oh, look around. My kitchen, her kitchen, wherever you are at that moment. And I think Anne's writing had that sparkle, that gift. We've enjoyed in the past few weeks since the book came out receiving fan mail on Anne's behalf, and someone who never met her wrote me and said, "I'm impressed that she describes so well, but she doesn't overuse adjectives. How is she doing that?" I'm just going back and looking at her verbs. How is she doing this? Making so many things come alive. So people are really noticing. A professional copy editor wrote us and said, "This is the first book I've read in a long time that I want to buy multiple copies of as gifts." Yeah. And, this is a person who reads every day. So that was thrilling, because certainly he doesn't even have a relationship with Texas. So
we also
that's
heard,
exciting.
We heard from Anne's middle school teacher who is coming to Uvalde with a thing that Anne wrote in 6th grade about the Wild West. That's like
that she kept all these years.
Handwritten thing. Yeah, it's been amazing, the people that we've heard from. And it's particularly cool hearing from people who have nothing to do with it. No connection to Texas, Uvalde, Anne, or anything else. But somehow they've already read this book. And that's why I think somehow there's that connection to the great posse of writers that we didn't get to hear their words, because this could have something like this could be happening all the time, with so many writers that didn't get to be remembered. And I'm so glad to bring this one to light.
I love that.
Yeah, you mentioned that she wrote hundreds of letters to her mother who lived down the street as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Those were also sent to us.
Were they? Yeah, I was wondering
Yes.
if her voice changed based on who her audience was.
No, it was very interesting how she wrote to her mother, because she often told her mother things that you would think, well, a mother knows that. Yeah. But it was as if she would go into kind of a writer's spell and want to really create the scene for her mother.
She would write big, long stories about what happened yesterday at dinner. She loved to create a scene and have characters and dialogue. And so, last week so-and-so came over, and she would really tell the story, and sometimes complaining about the people, or.
But I do want to say that some of the letters to the mother were not opened. Yeah, I mean, I got them in sealed envelopes, which intrigued me. Yeah, because sometimes
it might have been the wall of text problem.
Yeah, like maybe the mother had been planning to read them and just hadn't read that one, or maybe the letter had mysteriously resealed itself. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah. But I found that I felt kind of funny opening letters addressed to the mother if they looked as if they hadn't been read. Yeah.
I want to read really quickly because you mentioned, and then we'll open it up, I think, to questions as well. That she talks about writing like heaven, which I found really compelling too, although I know people who aren't writers might think, well, that sounds like hell to me. So I don't know. I want heaven to be a very undiaphanous place where you make or think of sentences with nouns and strong short verbs and well-spoken sparse adjectives, like a cottonwood tree on the waterfall bank of a perfectly clean, hard-running Nueces River beautiful but familiar as your favorite old shoes, and the smell of 2 hot cedar trees, and the smell of sweet earthly whitebrush in a hollow just cooling off at sunset with the warm air wafting over above it, pressing that basil lily dust, uncomplicated odor all the way down your throat, and mixing with the smell of your horse or mule's sweat, and how Lee always smelled like a clothesline full of cottons just as the heat had broken.
I love hearing that in your beautiful voice, Cathlin.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And then another place she said she would know it was heaven if Secretariat and Louis Armstrong were there.
Yeah.
So I think we'll
Thank you.
open it up to questions
Thank
as
you
well.
for listening to us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Does anyone have a question?
And we are recording this, so if you could raise your hand and I'll get the mic to you so you can
Hi,
ask
David.
your question.
Hi.
Hey, Naomi.
There. Yes, Ellen.
I know y'all have already heard from me, but
No, we love hearing from
I
you.
just wanted to make the comment because when you talk about the letters, the 10-page letters, and I actually printed out an email from her that was 5 pages long, and it is such a commentary on your beautiful editing to find the gems and be able to show us Anne so completely. My 5-page, single-spaced, not, I think there might be 10 periods. She
Yeah,
was not a
you
big
got it.
believer in punctuation.
Right.
So it's an even more impressive accomplishment that you have been able to distill it the way you did, and
Thanks.
I really think it's remarkable.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
We also threw in a few periods here and there.
Not too many. Thank you. Mark.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I was so curious in the process of crafting this sort of synthetic document, if you gave yourself any rules, like if you only extracted sentences or paragraphs or poems wholesale, or if you allowed yourselves to edit within the sentences, and sort of what that process of extraction or compression
We
looked
may have
like.
had slightly different practices.
Okay.
That's so interesting. What a good question. No, I don't think we edited within the sentences, but what about you?
Some, not. I mean, I think it was critical to preserve her voice, and would never do anything to change her voice. But there were parts that could be improved by, yeah, it is possible that we would take, a lot of times Naomi would send me selections that were longer than what we ended up using, and maybe I would take a little from the beginning and a little from the middle, or, and put them together and not put 3 dots. Like, actually, Naomi did have the instinct to put 3 dots when we were doing this, and I was like, who's ever going to know? Because it didn't seem to me like it would make you feel like maybe you missed something. But you didn't. The reason I took it out is because you didn't miss anything. So I was probably a little, whatever.
A little more harsh, a little more
harsher.
of a filter.
Right.
A filter.
And Naomi kept saying, I don't think we have enough. We need to have more chapters. I'm like, no, it's good. It's good the way it is.
Well, she is a book critic, and I am not. So there's something too. But that's a really great question. Yeah, I like that question. And it did add another dimension of complexity, though, to have 2 people doing it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, just to be frank, like there were parts where it wasn't the best side of Anne. There were we didn't feel like, oh, well, we need to give a real 360 portrait and show every, thing that she ever said that she might not. We didn't put anything in this book that we thought she would feel, oh, great, what the hell did they put that in there for,
No, we were
just
careful
took it out.
about.
Like, so
Yeah.
when she was in pain, sometimes these pain pieces went on very long and were, understandably full of self-pity and woe and misery. Well, we did not think that we took enough of that stuff that you get the feel. I think you get the feeling of what she went through without feeling like, I can't read another word of this,
Or if she was mad at a priest or a neighbor. Probably didn't go in. Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, how did Anne first connect with you? How did she find you?
Well, she was just in a teacher workshop. I used to do regular workshops about encouraging poetry with, school children of all ages, and she attended one, and she was aware that her sister's husband had been my college boyfriend. So this was our link. I do not believe we were ever once together with him. But he was the way that she spoke to me first at that workshop. And I wanted to quote, years ago, I did some rural community workshops in the state of Oregon with a great historian and writer named Terrence O'Donnell. And Terry used to say to the audiences that he firmly believed there was more great writing in the United States, or maybe in the whole world, that went unpublished and unknown than what was published and known. And he said this really haunted him because as a historian, he had been privy to many notebooks, journals, archival papers that were fabulous that no one else would ever see unless they went to that obscure archive. And I remember people really being touched by this comment, and they would come up and say, I think you're really right, or my aunt, or my mother, or my someone. And I kept thinking of him as we worked with Anne's pages, because I thought, this is definitely a person Terry would have wanted to champion.
Yeah, I do have the question if there'll ever be a sequel, since I know there is more probably of Anne.
I don't think so.
I think so. No, that's so cute, Cathlin. Thank you. I do feel guilty for millions of things that aren't published from her work. Yes, Hector.
As sort of a follow-up, what did the friendship or relationship become, and what were the boundaries maybe you set with regard to your encounters with Anne, or how you dealt with that?
There were no boundaries. I mean, in her final years, I was a friend who drove out and took bags of food from Central Market, and her favorite dish, which we put a recipe in the book for, and I took my mom became friends with Anne. She was crazy about her. And so, I mean, I felt like we got closer and closer, but almost it felt like family toward the very end of her life. And she really was serious about wanting us to do a book after she died. I mean, in one of our quotes at the front of the book is, "Please make me famous." And so we put that under the other quotes at the front of the book. But she really wanted her work to get out there. And I think she trusted that we would do that. So she didn't really give us any boundaries or anything.
There's a few excerpts in the book where she writes about Naomi, just a few little places, but she adored Naomi's family, and was, thrilled.
She just
thrilled.
loved
They were
people.
friends, but she was also a little starstruck by Naomi. I mean,
she just loved people.
Yeah. Well, she loved you.
Thanks.
And also, she certainly loved her family. I feel
much.
like her family really comes to life in
Yeah.
the book. She loved her brother Lee.
Yeah.
Woo.
I don't think
that's will be the sequel. Lee. Lee Part 2.
Yeah, definitely the favorite brother of all time. Yes.
I've heard a lot regarding the letters that you would get, and I wondered, what were your letters like?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, they were short, and they tried to be very responsive and loving and encouraging, but comparatively, they were short. Yeah.
I don't think that bothered her. I mean, the letters,
No.
they were, she was showing us something, giving us something. It wasn't like supposed to be a two-way street that we write 10-page letters to her. She was...
No.
Yeah.
And I never got a sense that she would be annoyed with someone if they didn't write her back in equivalent style or length.
She wrote
Never.
letters to a lot of people, not just Naomi. We had another friend of hers bring us a pile of letters, the mother,
The sister.
other people. And then
Yeah.
once she got on the internet, Facebook was great for her, and she loved, she enjoyed that. It's not saying she wanted a totally one-sided correspondence, but for her it was a form. She was making something. She knew she was making something for other people to appreciate.
Thank you for that question. It's meant so much to me that her husband said to us, and I don't think this is something he wouldn't once said, this is like the best time I've had reading this book since she died, because I'm with her. This is her. Yeah. So that was such an amazing comment. Very touching. Chuck, were you going to say something?
A little outside the book, but I was just so sorry that she had no way of getting treatment for her.
Oh, I know. We all were.
There was nothing they could do.
No, she tried and tried. She was open to everything, by the way. I mean, she strongly believed in the medical experts and all alternative suggestions. I mean, she would have tried anything.
She seemed like, the fibromyalgia, she seemed like she had a bunch of these autoimmune things that they haven't really figured out. She never came up with a disease that they really knew what to do about, but her symptoms were so severe, and chronic pain being the foremost. And I think it is really a shame, but it's not that she wouldn't try or that she was a Jehovah's Witness, or she wanted to be better. She really wanted to be better. I think only in the very last few years did you sense that she
had given up
done.
by then.
Yeah, done with
she
it.
couldn't do anything. Then.
She's really frustrated about having lost so much weight and being so weak and helpless.
Yeah. And what Ellen said about her sewing the little vests and bow ties for your sons, I mean, she sewed her own clothes through most of her life. She was really a maker. She was kind of the old school person who wanted to make everything from scratch, use every scrap, weave her own rugs. I have a rug in my house she wove. She just was that kind of to the earth. We need to know how to do things with our hands. And so it was very frustrating to her when her hands hurt too much to use in all these ways. But I feel like her voice is very encouraging and very full of energy and hope for others and hope for language. And even that part about the train of peace has been in my mind so much this past year. Like, why don't politicians say that? Well, you know what? We're just going to call a ceasefire, peace, and we're going to jump on, and then we're going to catch up with everything else we need to do. I mean, she has a lot of larger wisdom outside of her domestic, smaller town life as well. So I hope you will get to know her better, and we thank you so much for listening to us today. And Cathlin, we want to thank you for talking to us and taking time with the book.
Thank you so much for having me up here to ask questions.
And congratulations on your degree from Texas State. Thank you, Steve Davis, everyone here. And special thanks to Ellen Wagnon for coming from Houston, and Marion Winik for coming from Baltimore. And cheers to Steve Davis on his imminent retirement. I can't stand to think about it. We love you, Steve.